Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to come from the 20th through the 27th verses of Daniel's 9th chapter, and the visions which unfold and are described therein are rooted in a response, or actually they come in the midst of a prayer, better yet. So the prayer which opens the chapter with, we find Daniel praying for the sin, so he's interceding for his nation. This is something Ezra does. This is something Moses did, and the sins he identifies are we and ours. So even though he wasn't personally guilty of a lot of the sins which had brought them to their present predicament, he was assuming them on behalf. And the first thing we read in the 9th chapter is that this takes place in the first year of the Persian king. So we have a date of 539. That's when the Persians conquered the city of Babylon in the Babylon Empire by default. And so the 7th opens in the first reign of Belteshazzar, which is in 553, and then the 8th is in the third year, so that's 551. So the 7th and 8th take place before the events in the 5th chapter, and the one we're about to read or introduce upon, the vision, is the real focus of this matter, comes after the 6th chapter. So there's a change of control, change in command, and he's pondering over the strollings of Jeremiah the prophet. So Daniel is a prophet, and he mentions another prophet by name. So of the four major prophets, who are so designated because of the weight of their prophecies, the volume of them, are Isaiah, Daniel, Ezekiel, and Daniel. So, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel. So Isaiah was sort of this 8th century luminary who prophesied in Judah during the time when Israel, the northern kingdom, fell, and he pronounced Judah's impending destruction on them in their captivity, and that Jeremiah is sort of the tail end of that period. He's the early pre-exilic Jews when they're going from decline to deluge, and then Ezekiel and Daniel become the prophets of the exile, and Daniel was the one who was most immediate to the exile, so he predicted that it came 70 years. Daniel notices this specific passage on this specific day, and he's he has the vision that his people are finally going to return. They're going to come home, so he prays on their behalf, and he assumes, he says in verse 5, we have sinned and done wickedly. That's not something that he was into, at least not a regular practice, but the nation had done so even while they were in the exile. And the entire reason they were in the exile in the first place was because they had repeatedly violated the covenantal agreement. Then the 9th verse we read, to Yahweh our Elohim are the mercies and forgiveness, for we have rebelled against him. So he has no other choice, assessing the national situation, he has no other choice but to appeal and lean on the mercies of Yahweh's majesty, because they are rebelling. His nation, his chosen people, are living in rebellion against them, and that's why they are estranged. And he basically says that the evil that has been inflicted upon Yahweh's people does not diminish his own righteousness, because he is righteous and everything he does is just, including his righteous judgment. So Israel kind of got what they deserve. But then in the 17th verse, we read, and now our Elohim, hear the prayer of your servant and his supplication for the sake of Yahweh. Cause your face to shine on your temple, which is laid waste. So the temple is the other yet to be fulfilled mission, because their temple had been raised in ruin. And when Solomon dedicated the prayer, he said that people of future generations, if it were removed from the face of earth, could pray in the direction. And that's what we often see Daniel doing 3 times a day from out of his window in the 6th chapter. So even though his feet were in Babylon, his mind was in Jerusalem, and that hope and expectation sort of sustained him throughout. And so in the 20th verse, this is the first one we're going to cover in the passage we've selected. And while I was speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my supplication before Yahweh my Elohim, for the sacred mountain of my Elohim. So he's not only confessing and asking for individual forgiveness, but also national healing and restoration, and both can only come by the healing hand of Yahweh, who kind of has to look over humanity's sins, both Daniel's as an individual. There's not that many there. He was not a sinful person, but the nation of Israel were quite another matter. They were in their own a trap of their own making because they were so sinful, and this man Daniel is petitioning him on behalf in the sacred mountain of my Elohim. So that is not wherever he is exactly, but we can imagine that he's facing in the direction thereof. So he's facing towards Mount Zion from his window in Babylon while he's praying, and we read in the next verse that someone shows up, and that someone is someone significant, and what he has to say is extremely significant. While I was still speaking in prayer, the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision at the beginning, came close to me in swift flight about the time of the evening offering. Gabriel is one of the two angels who we know by name from the Bible, both Old and New Testament, and Daniel has met him before, and he is the archangel, he is the supreme one, but even next to Satan in Jude 9, we read that he does not face Satan on his own power, but rebukes him in the name of Yahweh. The swift flight, the time of the evening would have been about 3 o'clock. This is when the evening offerings and sacrifices are interchangeable terms. So this would have been 3 o'clock while he was praying. He was not sacrificing. There was no temple to sacrifice at, but what he was doing was lifting up a humble sacrifice of praise in the form of prayer, and his prayer is not interrupted, but joined by this vision with monumental significance. So his vision came because he was praying, so he was doing the right thing, and we cannot just expect these visions to fall into our laps if we are not engaged in kingdom work. And he made me understand and talked with me and said, O Daniel, I have now come forth to make you wise concerning understanding. So his whole purpose for being there was to explain and illuminate the vision and its meaning. He's going to give him a vision and what it all means. He is going to be his source of illumination, and our source of illumination is the Ruach Kodesh, the sacred spirit, without whom we can never illuminate the inspired message which he inspired, which is this book. But understanding, he's going to enhance his understanding and guide it and make it all it is meant to be and capable of being. At the beginning of your supplication, a word went out, and I have come to make it known, for you are greatly appreciated. So consider the word and understand the vision. So while he was praying, a word from Elohim, a prophecy, was given to Gabriel, and he imparts it to him while he's in the midst of prayer, and he is greatly appreciated. So his prayers must have meant something, must have been especially sweet smelling, and his service and loyalty and love and devotion for Yahweh. While he was away from the promised land, he was living worthy to remain in the promised land, and that was so it wasn't the geography, it's the spirituality of where we stand that defines who we are. And he wants him to consider, contemplate, meditate on the word, and he ultimately wants him to understand or comprehend the vision. A vision is a visionary element of a revelation which features or engages the sense of sight, the organ of the eye, and has visual components of. So angels are visible beings. Yahweh and the Spirit are not, but the angels, they're created creatures. They have flesh and bone, just like us. 70 weeks are decreed for your people and for your sacred city, to put an end to the transgression, and to seal up sins, and to cover wickedness, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most sacred. So there's a lot to digest here. First, we want to start with the number 70. The number 7 itself is numerologically significant. Its significance lays in its origins in the creation account. So the Jews were to structure their weeks by 7 days. The seventh and final one, Saturday, was to be their memorial of creation, where the day of fellowship and worship and free from all worldly concern. And they also had 70 as the multiplication of that number also had significance. So they had 70 sabbatical years where the land was to lay fallow and all debts to be restored and whatnot. It was all about restoration. And every 70 of these, so these years, there were also Jubilee years, which equalized the debt more fully. And the object of this vision, the beneficiary and the recipient, is your people. That's the Hebrew people, the Jewish people, the nation of Israel, and the Kodesh, the sacred city, is Jerusalem. So they are what this vision is all about. And the first three items of the purpose for which this is given have to do with sin. The final four have to deal with righteous. Let's read them in the order they appear to establish the sin. So to put an end to the transgression and to seal up sins and to cover wickedness. So that is, the nation of Israel, they are guilty of sin, and so they require atonement and removal, and that is going to come from the righteous one of the final four through 6 pertain to righteousness. To bring in everlasting righteousness and to seal up vision and prophecy and to anoint the most sacred. The most sacred is none other than the Messiah. So all that comes to transpire and pass is both of significant in relation to his mortal life and his second return, as we read. So the 25th verse reads, "Know then and understand from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah, the Prince, is 7 weeks and 62 weeks. It shall be built again with streets and a trench, but in times of affliction." So this initial, the starting point or the historical year in which this can be located is not appropriately the edict of Cyrus commanding the people to return that occurred in 539, but it was really a struggle to get them even rebuilding the walls in the temple. So we think the most reliable starting point and trustworthy one is the return of Nehemiah to build the walls, because the year 445, Ezra came in 457, but Nehemiah 445 minus 483 lines us to the year of the second one, which is the reference to the Messiah's mortal ministry and more extensively the death of Judaism as it was known, practiced, and understood in New Testament times in the year 70. But the business of restoration that was, the prophets Haggai and Zechariah preached to motivate the building of the temple, which was dedicated in 515. And I think the walls weren't built till Nehemiah got around and got busy in 545. So that is a period of 49 years that it takes somewhere in that stretch to really get it all complete and all rebuilt and all resettled. And after that, the 62 weeks, Messiah shall be cut off and have not, and the people of a coming prince shall destroy the city and the sacred place, and the end of it is with the flood, and waste are decreed, and fighting until the end. So the measurement, remember 483, that takes us to the year of his execution at the cross, 29 A.D. Little known fact, he was born 4 years before we traditionally mark our calendars as the dawn of A.D., but there's also a reference to what happens to Judaism, and this all lines up with the symbolisms, the numbers properly understood as years, sets of 7 years. These weeks all add up to a chronologically precise prophecy. So this prophecy has already been fulfilled. The temple was the second temple, the rebuilt temple built by Ezra and added onto by Herod, was laid in smithereens when the Zealot-led rebellion, which was launched in 66 A.D., was brutally suppressed by the year 70 A.D. by the future emperor and the emperor's son Titus, who the Jewish sacrificial system was over, everything was over, the temple records, the Jews could no longer prove their genealogies because it was all in there, and times of affliction certainly entered then. And, there's going to be fighting to the end. This is a condition of the end times. We read of wars and rumors of wars. but it also has a more immediate fulfillment. So the 27th and final verse we'll be discussing is actually a prophecy promised, and it's not going to be a pleasant one once it comes. There's no mark as to how long the 70th and final week will be between the 69th week or whatever came in verse 26, but we do know that it will be a period of 1 week, that's 7 years. This is the anti-Messiah's tyrannical rule, the duration thereof. And we read of him, and he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, and in the middle of the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and meal offerings, and on the wing of abomination he shall lay waste, even until the complete end, and that which is decreed is poured out on one who lays waste. So the he is the end-time dictator, the servant of Satan, his main human prop and minion, the end-time anti-Messiah dictatorship, and he's going to rise as a peacemaker, and he's going to have a covenant with the Jewish people for 7 years, during which time he's going to quash a conflict in the Middle East. They're always at war, and that's how he's going to gain the trust of the global community, and he's going to essentially by the Jews' loyalty by rebuilding their temple, and that's going to be an operation for a 3.5 year period, but then he's going to shut down sacrifices altogether. The 3.5 year mark marks the turning point of the tribulation, which is the period of unprecedented intensity and affliction and persecution upon the Christians across the earth. And but the anti-Messiah is one who can be linked to one of the 10 toes of the offshoot and offspring of the feet of the statue that Daniel described in the 2nd chapter, the one which emerges more completely in the 7th chapter. But that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.